where are you from, brother?
Yo soy de Lowell, Massachusetts.
And you've lived there your whole life?
I've lived here my whole life, yeah. Toda mi vida.
Nice. And where are your ancestors from?
So my family, I'm Puerto Rican. I'm the first generation born here in the United States. My ancestors. So yeah, I did a DNA test and I have 21% indigenous blood coming from the Caribbean and then South America. And then of course, Germanic, Celtic, North African, pero yo soy Boricua, Puerto Rican.
And how much influence, in that you had the indigenous blood and, being first generation, how influential was Puerto Rican culture in your upbringing and in your home? How present was it?
It was very influential. My abuelita era espiritista. She was a presidenta de mesa. And so when I was born, I was born with una telita en la cara, I think they call it the claw on the face. And so my abuelita said que él va a ser un medium. And so when I was little, I would see, I had what I thought was an imaginary friend. And I would walk around the house because the spirit didn't speak. It would speak to me in sign language. So I would sign language what the spirit was saying. And so that, of course, always worried my mother. So she would contact my abuelita. And she's like, no te preocupes, don't worry, que él tiene los dones, él tiene las facultades espirituales. So she had her centro, she had her templo in Puerto Rico. And so every summer, we would go to Puerto Rico. Or I would go to Puerto Rico. Sometimes my parents would come. And, it was a very important and like a big influence in my life.
And what was your grandmother's name?
Mi abuelita se llamaba Juana Virginia.
She was the one with the temple, and she was the one that was resourcing the community.
Yeah. La Virginia.
So as you now are showing these abilities, and this is obviously something that's in your DNA from an ancestry standpoint as well as family, once they're seeing that you have this talent, what are some of the things they're having you do? Are you frequenting misas or, what kind of exposure are they giving you now at a young age?
So so in Puerto Rico, we don't call them misas, we call them veladas espirituales. Nice. So my grandmother would do veladas públicas once a month, with other mediunidades of different rango de. I'm trying not to speak. I speak Spanglish, people. I'm so sorry.
No, viewers love it.
All right. So ella, she would bring. There was always mediunidades or mediums de diferentes rangos, ranges of evolución espiritual. And so my abuelita era la presidenta de mesa. Then she had la mediunidad de mano derecha, los auxiliadores, los aprendizajes, the mediums de aprendizaje. If it was early on the day, parents would bring their children, but many times las reuniones it was more at night. So we would participate in some of it because las reuniones espirituales, las veladas espirituales could start around 6 o'clock in the evening and last all the way to 11 o'clock. And then there would be like a lot of people that would come to the templos to get una causa trabajada, to receive a message from the spirit, una limpia, whatever it was. So when I was little, we were not really allowed to, she was always very protective of me, but she'd always have mediunidades in the house. And so they would try to test mi desarrollo, my development espiritual. One of the first things I remember was I was very little. There was a señora, I don't remember her name, and so she had un fuente, una copa of water, and she said to me, ¿Qué tú ves, niño? ¿Qué tú ves en esa agua? And so, my mind, I just wanted to go outside and play because, I didn't see the world of spirit through la copa or fuente espiritual. I saw the spirits. I see the spirits the way I see people, you know. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it was always part of my life. My grandmother passed away early on in my life, and then that left a void in my life. I was a teenager when she passed away, and so then I started experimenting with other traditions and religions. Being here in New England, Massachusetts, the capital of Wicca, you know, in New England or in the United States, you know, Wicca called to me, you know, being a kid. And I participated in Wicca for a while. And then I kind of like, there was always something missing. And I have a lot of respect to La Wicca, but there was something always missing, you know. And then I found out about La Santeria, Afro-Cubana. First it was a palero and then a santero. And so I received my los guerreros y los collares, but that's as far as I went to that.
Nice.
And then I started getting older, y la hambre. I'm a very hungry person. So then I started traveling. I went to Santo Domingo, la 21 edición. I went to Venezuela, María Loncero. I studied con un brujo en Colombia, un shaman. And then I met my padrino in los Sance. And then I received los Sance. So I don't even know if I'm straying away from what you asked.
No. All of it is great content. I think for the viewers that aren't really aware, I mean, obviously you have such a huge following, but for those that are coming from Ifa or things that may be slightly different, could you please define what Sance is, if it can be?
So Sance came to Puerto Rico. They say it arrived in Puerto Rico on the west side of the island, where today is 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏. So there was a time where a lot of Haitian people and Dominican people were migrating, well, they still migrate to Puerto Rico, but they were migrating to La Islas, de Borinquen. And with them, they brought the 𝗀𝗏𝗏, they brought los espíritus. And so they brought la 21 edición, they brought el Voodoo, they brought la 𝗃𝗶𝗍𝗏. And so that intermingled con el Espiritismo. The word Sance comes from the Haitian Creole word Sanset, which means ancestors, los ancestros, los espíritus. So Sance right now today is a subculture within a subculture within a subculture of a culture. It's a very small group, you know what I'm saying? Wow. But a lot of them are, it's like a mixture of Voodoo, 𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗏𝗏, and 21 division, but with the influence of Allan Kardec Espiritismo. So you'll see when we open la velada, we use las oraciones de Allan Kardec. Y los espíritus, you know, they come from different rangos. There's a way that the spirits come through, not just in Sance, but in all time Puerto Rican Espiritismo, where it was always los indios bajamos primero. The Indian spirits always came first. Los espíritus de la raíz. And after los indios came through, you know, then came los santos. You know, los santos, and usually they were Catholic saints, of course, but these Catholic saints, they didn't act European. You know, they would act Creole. You know what I'm saying? San Miguel didn't act like you would think a Catholic, you know, saint would act, Santa Bárbara, whatever saint. And then after that, in closing, venían los espíritus africanos. And so it's interesting that if you look at that, that is the way, you know, the Caribbean was made up. It was first the Arawak people of the land, los espíritus de la raíz, you know, the spirits of the land. And then the European came. And so if you notice in the olden day Sance, veladas, fiestas espirituales, fiestas santeras is what they call them now. It was always los indios bajaban primero, siempre los indios, and they would cleanse and purify. Then los santos venían, y los santos would they would give messages to el público. as a whole. And then venían los espíritus africanos, los espíritus negros, and they would break like brujerías or, stuff like that.
Interesting stuff. And I love the respect and the cadence of the velada, right? Where, there is that process of the order where you had the indigenous, then you had the immigrant European, and then ultimately those that were brought over via slavery. So it's a very interesting dynamic how spiritually there's like a order to it. They respect it, with something such as this, and you being somebody so knowledgeable at this point, I think with things like this, you see the similarities between obviously Sance and even something like a hoodoo almost. It's almost like Puerto Rican hoodoo to a certain degree from what I can gather.
Right. So hoodoo, we call it 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗶. In Puerto Rico, 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶. Like 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗶, which 𝗀𝗶𝗶 comes from the word 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗀, which is a Congo word, I think it is, which is to do magic. So, so when someone says, te están tirando una gafería, te están haciendo gafe, that is the Spanish way of saying voodoo. But then it took on that gafe, like 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗶 took on that Spanish, te están tirando brujería. Te están tirando sal, they throw salt on you, which is a way of te están salando la vida. But yeah, you do see a lot of similarities, not just in Puerto Rico, in the United States. I've been to Venezuela, I've been to South America, and you see, like Venezuela, very beautiful. You see los indios, the native spirits, and always they come down, then the santos, and and it's weird because in those days they didn't have computer, no one can research this stuff. How did this order happen in various, and even in Voodoo, you'll see Haitian Voodoo, you'll see some similarities. How did this happen when there was no computer? People were not texting each other, and not as widespread as we have it today, where you can go online and find out this information.
No, it's incredible how our ancestors were able to confirm things far before modern science could. I actually have some Mali blood in me from the Dogon tribe, and these people were astronomers before a telescope was invented. Does Sance have an initiation process formally?
So we don't call it initiation. Well, so I practice Sance, but I also practice Seminismo, which I would like to talk about also, and of course Espiritismo. But Sance, it's more, we don't say iniciaciones, we say bautismo y puntos espirituales. Some people do say initiations, but what you receive son los bautismos espirituales, los puntos espirituales, and they cleanse your heads and all that. So it is kind of like I guess, to use that word initiation, right? That initiation word comes from like more of European culture, where these are more rites of passages that you go through.
Definitely. And you mentioned something else there. I don't want to mispronounce, but you said Seminismo or something to that.
Seminismo, yeah, Seminismo.
Please dive into that, please.
Seminismo is what we're calling it now. Seminismo is the indigenous spirituality. Before Christopher Columbus, before the Europeans came to the Caribbean, before the Africans were brought, it is the Arawak spirituality. The Arawak people, the Taino, the 𝗃𝗶𝗿𝗄, the Caribe, the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏, were very spiritual people, and everything revolved around the world of spirit for these people. And so Seminismo, the word Seminismo is like saying semiism in English. It comes from the word semi. The word semi is the spirits that the Tainos venerated. And so that's where that word Seminismo comes from. So it's like a shamanic, it's kind of like a shamanic indigenous spirituality, where a lot of Seministas are trying to remove a lot of the outside influence and keep it very indigenous, So you'll see, a lot of, it's sad to say, the atrocities, what happened in our Caribbean islands. Think about when Christopher Columbus came to our islands. There was 30,000 people in Borinquen alone, and in 50 years, that from disease and slavery and murder and rape, how people dwindled, but still 500 years later, the los mestizos or los mulatos, because what happened is the Spanish didn't bring women from Spain, so they were taking on indigenous concubines, they were taking on indigenous wives, and so that's where we became los mestizos, los mulatos, and all that, with the Africans, of course, coming in. But that the indigenous spirituality never really died out. It just, what's the word that I want to use? It hid, and it hid in the similar ways that you will see in the Mexica cultures, in the Aztec cultures, and so like a lot of the semi-spirits became santos. They were hidden, and then in the 70s, around the 60s, the 70s, it was when a lot of people who called themselves Taino or Arahuaque were saying, no, enough with calling them Santa Barbara or this. No, let's call this spirit 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗁 for what it is. Let's call this spirit Atabe for what she is. Let's call this spirit 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗁𝗍 for what she is. And so from that, Seminismo started, growing.
That's really beautiful, brother. When I did my ancestry, I came with, I think, 1% to 2% indigenous Puerto Rican. My grandfather, may he rest in peace, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, he was from Carolina.
Carolina.
But he was very Spanish, very European influenced as far as his features. He was a fair-skinned gentleman, very good looking with green eyes, right? But I was always very intrigued because you had to think there was something there before. And
of course.
Before Africans were brought over, before Europeans went through their process and did what they did in so many places, I remember when we were speaking on the phone, because, I'm a cigar guy, and I actually, one of my favorite brands is actually Atabe, and then when I'm looking at the brand and I start understanding the history behind it, could you kind of explain what Atabe is, or the concept of it, within, the Seminismo?
So before we can speak about Atabe, we have to speak about 𝗃𝗃𝗃. 𝗃𝗃 is, the word 𝗃𝗃 means spirit with no spirit ancestor. 𝗃𝗃, right? And 𝗃𝗃 has no masculine or feminine. It is both masculine and feminine, right? 𝗃𝗃 is the spirit that we cannot give name. It is the architect of the universe. It is the creator or creatrix of the universe. And then 𝗃𝗃, his thoughts, or his or her thoughts, wanted to create. And so he became woman. And when he became woman, he became Atabe. And Atabe, in her cosmic dance, which symbolizes kind of like the Milky Way. You know how the Milky Way and the sun and the moon goes around in a certain fashion. Atabe willed herself to become pregnant. And from this pregnancy, she had twins, 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗁𝗁 and 𝗃𝗏𝗏. So Atabe today, and her name is bigger than that, but Atabe, she's la madre de la luna, la madre del mar. She's the I don't want to use the word goddess because that comes from European cultures. The great spirit of womanhood, of the sacredness of womanhood, of the sacredness of giving birth. And so that is what Atabe, well, a little symbolism of who Atabe and what her greatness is.
That's beautiful. As I delve into more spiritualities, even though 𝗃𝗏𝗏 and Ifa consumes most of my time, as I have the privilege of speaking with people such as yourself or any of our other guests, and you begin to see the similarities between the truth. I mean, you look at Ifa is nothing short of a divine feminine spirituality, and then to hear you speak of our ancestors and how similar their creation myth is, especially with the concept of the twins and just hearing the similarity between the two.
There's a lot of similarities. There's a similarity between I'm not a Santero, and I try not to speak on those religions, but there's a similarity in the story of Yemaya, and I think it's Erile, with a Taino mythology on 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗶, which is an aspect of Atabe. Atabe has many aspects, and 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶 is a river spirit, un espíritu de agua dulce. And so there was this man, he had a disease, a sexual transmitted disease, and which is a deep mythology. And so he was going crazy, he was going sick. 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗶 was his name. And when he was going crazy, he went to the river, and there he met a naked woman, the most beautiful woman that he had ever seen in the river. And she decided to heal him. And when she healed him with herbs, with the 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗶, with the seeds of the 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗶 and all these things, she showed him the mysteries of La Maraca. And so it is in this mythology that he became the first 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗁, or the first 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗶, depending on the culture that you're from, which is like the first shaman within the Caribbean. So you'll see a lot of similarities like that right there. That story is very similar to the story of Yemayá, and I think it's 𝘃𝗏𝗏. And there's a lot of, so many similarities within, when you hear Orisha Patikis, I think that's what they called it, you're going to see a lot of similarities with the Taino mythologies. The only thing different is that the Tainos really never took on human characteristics except for 𝗀𝗀𝗏𝗏 and some other ones. But the ones that you hear that have human characteristics were not because they were gods, but because they were the stories of ancient ancestors who, after their death, became elevated, kind of like Jesus, elevated into God form. But if you see like a lot of the mythologies of the Semi, they don't take on human qualities. They're trying to explain, this is what the sun does, this is what the ocean does, and this is that energy, you know. So they don't take on that like European, like Hecate is this way, or this goddess has this attitude. 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗶, the mother of winds, she was not viewed as an evil entity or an evil spirit. She was a part of the force of nature, that in order for there to be growth, there must be death. And in order for change, we must destroy, we must lose everything. So when 𝗀𝗶𝗶𝗶, would blow, and her spirit, her two allied spirits, 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗶, thunder god, the thunder Semi, and 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏, another spirit, they brought change. And so, like, when you hear the mythology of Atabe, and you hear how she had two children, 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗶𝗃, and then 𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗃. 𝗃𝗏𝗃 is the destructive force, while 𝗃𝗏𝗿 is more the creative force. And then, so sadly to say, a lot of people view 𝗃𝗏𝗃 as the devil. The Taino, the Arawak, didn't have a concept of the devil. And so for us, 𝗃𝗏𝗃 is, we learn through our trials and tribulations. We learn through our sufferings. We learn more through suffering. And so 𝗃𝗏𝗃 teaches us that through our trials and tribulations, our mistakes, there is a lesson that we must learn.
Incredible. Now, mind you, you hear words like you said, 𝗃𝗏𝗃, which is actually a type of cohiba that you can buy, and Atabe, and them, basing themselves off of ancestral beliefs and the role that tobacco played. I mean, what role does tobacco play in this spirituality?
Tobacco was the most sacred thing for the Taino, and not just for the Taino, for all indigenous people throughout Latin America and throughout the Americas. When Christopher Columbus came, all Christopher Columbus came, he thought he had hit India, right? That's why we got that word, Indians, right? He thought he had hit somewhere in India. The first thing that the Arawak people gave him, the Taino, what we're calling them, because Taino was not what they were called. The word Taino comes from "Yo soy buena gente," I'm good people. Wow. So that was a salute. Yo soy una buena gente, I mean you no harm, what they said. And so, they took on that term of los Taino. So when Christopher Columbus came first to Quisqueya, Haiti, which is the first island that he had hit, and then on a second voyage, he came to Puerto Rican. First he went to Haiti and Cuba, and then I'm not sure Cuba was the second voyage. But anyways, tobacco was the first thing that they offered, because tobacco is a spirit. Tabacu is a semi-spirit. And tabacu is the messenger of spirit. And so tobacco was not just in Taino culture. You can see this throughout South America, Central America, North America, the importance of that spirit. Tabacu is a great spirit. He's a great healer. He or she is a great healer. But when you abuse of anything, the sun gives you vitamin D, but if you abuse it, it can give you cancer to your skin. So the same thing with tabacu. You abuse that spirit and you disrespect that spirit, it could hurt you. But tabacu, it was like the messenger of 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏. It was our intermediate, or the indigenous intermedium, in ways to communicate with spirits. And so they would either use the tabaco alone, or they would create a hallucinogenic with the 𝘃𝗶𝗶𝗏, la semilla de 𝘃𝗶, which is la 𝘃𝗶𝗶𝗏. And so they would pound this, what the shamans, 𝘃𝗶𝗶𝗏, they would pound this, and they would ingest this through their nose. It was a mixture of these, and they would go into a psychedelic trip to communicate with 𝘃𝗶𝗏, the spirits, or 𝘃𝗶𝗶𝗏. 𝘃𝗶𝗏 is the ancestors. So tobacco was very, and it still is very important in a lot of our rituals. We do limpias, we call on the spirits with it, we cleanse with it, we purify with it.
No, definitely a spiritual experience, and it's definitely utilized within Ifa and seen as a sacred material to create that ambiance. Now, your full title is Sancista Brujo Luis, right?
Sancista Brujo Luis, yeah.
Absolutely. So the brujo there isn't for no reason, so.
Brujo comes from, that's an apodo that I was given when I was little by un primo, because yo era el brujito de la familia. My brother, he's white, he's light-skinned, so he's known as Canito. In Puerto Rico, Canitos are light-skinned people. Sure. And my sister's apodo is Gita, and my apodo was El Brujito, because yo siempre, when I was little, first of all, I spoke with spirits, imaginary friends, but I found pleasure in nature and making concoctions, and my favorite toys were palos and sticks and piedras that I would find in the river. And so my family, one of my primos, his name is Yuka, we call him Yuka, he gave me that apodo, El Brujito de la Familia. So ese va a ser El Brujito de la Familia. So that's part of my apodo. Sancista, I took that on. That's just a public thing that I took on after I received my Sance ceremony. When I was 29, 30 years old. Nice. And I participated. I still do practice Sance here, but as I got older, it becomes like, my foundation was always el espiritismo criollo, el espiritismo folclórico, el espiritismo that we practice in Puerto Rico, which if you look at el espiritismo that we practice in Puerto Rico, and you read the books of, one of the first books that was ever published in the Americas was, I forgot the title, but was by Ramon Pané. And Ramon Pané was asked by Christopher Columbus to study the Arawak people, the natives. And so when you read this, you're like, that sounds like the way we practice at PDP today, 500 years later, the way they communicate with the spirits, the way they cleanse, and the way they see sacred objects. So anyways, I got my name from Sancista there, and then Espiritismo has always been my foundation, but I'm a hungry person, and I'm always looking to grow, to desarrollar. I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago, as I'm not going to be the same person I am in 10 years. I have a lot of respect for religion. I have no problem with religion, but I'm too hungry to be placed in a box, Sure. Yo soy una persona, I'm a person that a mí me gusta aprender. Even when I was little, when I first saw the Satanic Bible, God, I don't know who's that book, but I read that because I was always curious. I was always curious and reading the occult and all that. I don't know. I'm probably straying away from what I'm saying here.
No. Great content. Now, you mentioned you used to go to these reunions with your grandmother, may she rest in peace. And I could imagine the experiences you had there afterwards. What are some of the most impressive or phenomenal things you've seen in some of these misas? Or forgive me.
Trabajando la causa, I've seen them trabajando la causa. Trabajando la causa is when a causa is a spirit. It could be a spirit or it could be an energy that is upon a person, whether it's through karmic or whether it's to someone sending you a lower vibrational spirit. And so I've seen the mediums do causas. I saw the mediums. I've seen mediums just like, we call it 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗃𝗏, where spirits and mediums would do automatic writing. And then some mediums do 𝗃𝗏𝗏 where they draw. They can draw what the spirit looks like. Amazing things that I've seen. I've just seen so many things that I'm trying to pinpoint. Some of the amazing things. I see.
That one thing. It's like I can't go out of my mind.
Yeah, I've seen people. I've seen people that supposedly had cancer in their stomach, and they would go enfrente del templo or centro, and las mediunidades would work. They would do like a spiritual psychic surgery, not physical, not physically cutting the person at all, but energetically trabajando esa persona. And I've seen people that they were supposed to pass away because the doctor said, "Oh no, you got 3 years," but miraculously healed.
Now, being that there's such a new wave now of things like that talk about psychedelics, and you mentioned when the 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏s used to make their concoctions to be able to enter into their state,
right?
And you mentioned apprenticing with a shaman in Colombia. Could you delve into that part of your adventure and journey? And
Wow.
what correlations were you able to make between the things I just mentioned? What was that like?
Wow, it was amazing. Okay, so I'm gonna go back a little bit. When I was in Santeria, I had gone to 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏, and a señora, she was Cuban. She se montó con Oshun, and Oshun said to me, this woman said to me, yo soy tu madre. I'm like, who's this spirit? Who's this woman? I didn't understand who she was at the time, right? And then, of course, I got to understand. She said, yo te voy a enseñar a ti. I'm going to show you que yo soy tu madre. Something's going to happen y tú vas a ver con tus propios hijos. Yeah, and as that spirit said it, me pasó with my children, and gracias a Dios, my children are here. But anyways, I had gone to Colombia and met this Espiritismo Brujo here in Massachusetts, and I met a Venezolano too here in Massachusetts. And so anyways, I went to Colombia, and at that time it was very, dangerous guerrilla warfare and all that. But he had brought me to a river, and in this river, I mounted a spirit that was not from my culture. It was more from, the South American culture. And I remember thinking, as like when I came by, when I came back in the States, like, why, here I have supuestamente 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏 and mi mamá. Why would I mount this spirit from Colombia, a river spirit from Colombia, an indigenous female spirit from Colombia, that doesn't participate or partake with my culture? And then I realized, wait a second, that spirit is just another name for what people call Oshun and what we call in Sance 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏. Oshun is her African mask, her African face, but then in Sance, she's not pure African. She becomes 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, and 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏 is a mulata, a mestiza spirit, like her people, where she has African elements and indigenous elements. And so I started thinking, that's just the name of that spirit for this spirit. Am I making sense what I'm trying to say here?
Absolutely, yeah. It's syncretism for sure.
Yeah, syncretism.
These different names, it's the same energy. Yeah, it's just to use that we put to be able to identify them. What were some of the things
right? It's like,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
What were some of the things you were able to learn from this gentleman after you went into trance with the spirit? I'm sure they were like, whoa.
Well, I know that I'm not into hallucinogenics. I don't do very well, and that was foretold to me when I was little, you know. But the only thing that I like to do is smoke my cigarrillo y mi café. I tried a little bit of hallucinogenics. That was not a good situation. When I was little, I was told, "Pa qué darle medicina?" You don't give. How do I say this? If you don't need that medicine, you don't take that medicine. Does that make sense to you? I
Absolutely.
already see the world of the spirit. Ya yo comunico con los espíritus. Ya los espíritus, yo monto los espíritus. So why am I taking an herb or a concoction to do that when de naturaleza ya yo lo hago? Then of natural, de naturaleza, I already do it. So that's one thing that I learned there.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, if you don't need the medicine, and because that's really to open up. And I think a lot of people, trying things like DMT, ayahuasca, and things like that, some people need that accelerator, but then you have people such as yourself who are just born with that fluidity and elevation. So
Right.
I see that you have a couple things on and you have a beautiful background behind you. I'd love it if you took a moment to kind of explain the different
Thank
scarves that you have on
So
and background.
this is the scarf right here. This is my my shamanic shawl that I use to protect. And then in the bottom, we use un cinturón espiritual. It's kind of similar. And the cinturón is to protect the solar plexus of our body. And this is just to protect, el shaman, the shamanic shawl. A lot of people think that this is the gay flag. Well, the gay flag it was synchronized with the colors of the rainbow, which is the serpent spirit.
Right.
And so it symbolizes all our ancestors, todos los ancestros de nosotros. But it comes from for us, there's a spirit, a serpent spirit. His name is 𝗃𝗏𝗿𝗄𝗏. And 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗄𝗏 is on one side of 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗏 is the serpent spirit. So 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗏 on one side, he is white, his belly. And then on the opposite side is the rainbow, you know. So the rainbow represents all nationalities, and it symbolizes rain that comes from 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, la lluvia, and a reincarnation, rebirth, you know. And so it symbolizes that. And so you'll see that pattern or that motif, a lot in my scars and in my cinturón espiritual. A lot of people think it's because it's gay pride, in which I am homosexual, but no, it's not because it's gay pride, because the gay flag has 5. This has more numbers, which is a sacred number for the spirits. And you'll see this motive in shamanistic cultures, not just in South America. And I'm going to use the word shaman because that's what that term became popular with Carlos Castaneda in a book that he wrote, The Teachings of Don Juan. So now we use the term shaman. But if you go to in those days, if you went to South America, you said shaman, they wouldn't understand what they was. They would say, oh, un Paco, oh, you know what I'm saying, or un beike, or un brujo curandero. Okay, I understand what you said. But anyway, so you'll see this similarity in Asia, in Africa, in Mongolia, in Europe, ancient cultural, beliefs.
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at the
Yeah.
similarities, even within Ifa, there's a deity known as 𝘃𝗏𝗏𝗏, and he
Mm-hmm.
is the rainbow, and it's ultimately represented by the serpent. So as I'm just listening to you, my eyes are getting wide because I'm like, it's just so uncanny how
Well,
similar it is.
it's interesting because there's a belief that the Taino culture is the indigenous culture was a very sexual culture, and it didn't have that stigma that the Christians brought, right? Um, so 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗏 represents the sperm of God, right? And the la lluvia, we come into this earth as a white serpent. We do come into
Yeah.
this earth as the white serpent. So we come as 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗿𝗏, as Yaya wanted us to be. So you'll see that serpent importance or that lizard or that snail importance in many cultures. I'm going to use the word shaman because everyone understands what shaman is. In many shamanic traditions around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with any 𝗏, it represents the ancestors, the dinosaurs, longevity.
Yeah, exactly.
I ask you, you being basically a priest of this spirituality and being gay, is it an open spirituality? Are people of set orientation? Are they welcome? Have you had some?
You said to me, so Seminismo, there's shamanism for every culture in the world, right? Or indigenous culture. But one thing that you said to me is that you said that you had 1%. I think you said you had 1% indigenous blood inside you.
Yeah, that's what it said. I mean, at the chart.
Okay. So think about this. One of our greatest trees for us, because trees have spirits, right? Is la ceiba, right? If you ever see la semilla de la ceiba, the seed of the seed of la ceiba is smaller than a grain of rice, right? If you plant that semilla, and if you give that semilla light, and if you give that semilla water, and you give that semilla that seed you fertilize it, it becomes the biggest tree in the Caribbean. Brother, if you have that semilla, those spirits live within inside you. It is up to you and up to each person, if they have that semilla, to give it light, to give it water, to let that grow, because people will, and maybe Seminismo won't be for you. Maybe you'll practice what you do, Ifa. That's the way, the spirits will call you, because in the world of spirit, there's no religion. Religion is what we create here in man. But if you have that semilla, yes, there are indigenous spirits within you. Somewhere down the line, that 1% was 10%, that 10% was 15, that 15% 20, that 20, and it keeps going until it was 100%. So somewhere down the line, you have ancestors that were 𝗿𝗏𝗿𝗂𝗃. They were from South America or North America, or Lord knows where they were from. And those spirits are part of who you are, and they have that right, like your African spirits, like your European side, to be honored and venerated. Because one thing that is sadly happening to indigenous cultures throughout the world is it's always been pushed to the side. We don't, and us, that we have that blood, that we are mestizo people, that we are mulatto, because mulatto is a mixture of African and Arahuaque, right? We have to not forget, our indigenous roots, la raíz del árbol. We often look at a tree and we look at el tronco, and we look at qué lindo the canopy. How about la raíz, the roots of that tree. And in that root, you find your ancestors, you find your spirits, and they can come from many walks of life. And for many years, my mother's side was the white side, and my father's side was the lo indio. And I didn't want to be like my father's side. I know I was so morenito. I want to be like my mom's side. But then something happened where los espíritus me dio un bofetón en la cara, y yo abrí los ojos. I opened my eyes because they gave me una hija que es browncita como el caramelo, dorada, con pelo negro, with beautiful straight hair. She looks indigenous, Papa. She looks, you can't, she's Taina, and it's like, damn, what I hated, God gives to me, and I have to accept what I am. And one of my spirit guides, mi guía principal, mi cacique en cabeza, un cacique, the term says it all, it was un indio, it's always been an indigenous spirit, so it's always called me, So, like, back to you, if you have that 1% within you, that semilla, the ceiba, it's up to you, brother, to make that semilla, that little seed, become that great ceiba tree.
No, definitely. I'm gonna be, especially after this interaction, delving more, learning more, because you see the similarities, and it's really beautiful, And I ask you, you mentioned your daughter, and me being a girl dad as well. I know the emotion it brings out in us as men.
Yeah.
How how gratifying has it been for you to be able to expose your daughter to your culture after you've had this awakening?
So my daughter's twins, right?
Wow.
One, yeah, they're twins. So one has, yo soy blanquito, but one has African features, beautiful lips, and the most beautiful nose, and the most beautiful curly hair, bien boricua. And the other one, that caramelo skin with that straight black long hair that she has. Um, it was my daughter, one of my twins, that made me realize uno tiene que aceptar lo que tú eres. You have to accept who you are and see the beauty. And it was in my daughter. I got to learn and interact with my father's side of the family. Yeah, son un poquito loco, but son buena gente. Son la más buena gente que hay en el mundo. You know what I'm saying? Son locos porque somos locos, pero son buena gente. So, you know, everything to me is a lesson.
No, beautiful. I ask you, brother, especially with you being able to have grown so much within, you know, the beliefs of our ancestors, what effect do you think these ideas and these concepts could have on the world positively, as far as like Seminismo being, you know, kind of propagated and spread out, you know, as you're doing your work and teaching people about it? What positive effect do you think it could have on the world?
So the Semi is very beautiful because the Semi, unlike other entities, the indigenous spirits, they are the spirits of the land. They are the spirit of the earth. How can you say, and I'm gonna use 𝗿𝗏𝗿𝗄𝗏 terms if you don't mind. So you know, how can you say you honor 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏? How can you say you love 𝘃𝗶𝗏𝗏 if you go to the ocean and you see garbage and you don't pick it up? That's what the Semi teaches you. If you're gonna go to your mother's house and limpia, ayúdala, cleanse her, you know, the Semi is the earth around us. It is, you know, God. Yeah, we have God, but there's one entity that is with you from the moment you are born until the moment you die, and that is Madre Tierra. She's the one that is our foundation where our feet land every day. That's Madre 𝗃𝗶𝗱𝗏𝗏, Pachamama, whatever name you want to call her. And if we are going to honor the spirits, los Semi, los Oricha, Loa, you have to respect la Madre Tierra. There's no way you can tell me that you're going to respect la Sirel or 𝘃𝗏𝗏𝗏 tirando basura, because you're disrespecting la Madre Tierra. To me, that makes no sense. So in order for us to envelop that indigenous idea, we have to visualize the earth as the most sacred living entity, and we are destroying her. Look what we've done in 100 years. Imagine in 100 years' time what our grandchildren are going to, or great-grandchildren. We today have to, as spiritual people, put our egos to the side and say, vamos, let's take care of that entity, that energy, la Madre Tierra, that takes care of us. And that's what Seminismo teaches me. El amor profundo a la Madre Tierra.
No, beautiful concepts. And, you know, with 𝗃𝗏𝗏𝗏, it's the same thing with 𝗃𝗏𝗍𝗍. And, you know, if you can't respect the earth, we can't respect ourselves. So, you know, what advice do you give to people who are thinking about getting involved in these spiritualities, whether it's Sance, you know, Voodoo, Semi, you know, what do you recommend to them before they decide to take that step as far as preparation, so they're ready?
My biggest advice is people want to, you know, there's a way que se come el bacalao. You know, when you take bacalao, you don't shove it down your mouth, right?
Exactly.
Uno tiene que coger el bacalao and be careful con la espinas because you're going to get choked, right?
Yep.
People today, we live in a society that everybody wants to run sin saber gatear, without being able to crawl. Everyone wants to run. They're in such a hurry, you know, and they forget to learn how to run, to learn how to walk, to learn how to skip. They just want to run. Cógelo suave, because in every spirituality, every religion around the world, hay mucho charlatán. Vamos a ponerlo lo que es, right?
Yeah.
Pero Dios y los buenos espíritus, if you shut up for a second and you quiet your mind, listen to your spirits, because the spirits will tell you, cuidado con esta persona. So listen and don't go running. You know, don't take your time. Don't go running. Cógelo suave. You know, be like the tree. You don't see the tree running. You know, outside the tree standing firm. He's chill. Be like that tree. Don't go running. You know what I'm saying? Because you're gonna fall. So cógelo suave, because there's a lot of estafadores out there in the world, in every religion, right? And sadly to say, there's a lot of people who are, they say they're spiritual, but they're more materialistas. They honor that green paper more so than they would ever the spirit. And si algo te dice a ti, cuidado, o fo. I'm going to say in Puerto Rico, si algo te dice fo, por más perfume que tú le pongas, es fo. You know what I'm saying? If something says, wait a second, this doesn't smell right, listen to it. That's your mediumistic ability. We're all born with that. Listen to it, because one day you're going to be like, I should have listened to my spirits. I should have listened to myself. So pueblos fly.
Luis, wow, you know, an amazing interaction. Been able to learn so much. I've been able to, you know, how do I say this? Compare so many things for a greater understanding of each of our cultures that we practice as a base. And
Thank you.
We sincerely appreciate your time, and we sincerely appreciate your passion, because a man is really measured by his passions and the way he's received within his community. And needless to say, the community has spoken and given a positive response to you. You know, from
Thank you.
Our Roots podcast and all of us, I'd love to give you the opportunity, after our gratitude, to just leave with some final words for our community, your community, and maybe some things you have coming up that you want some people to know about.
My final, so things that are coming up, gracias a Dios. So I'm always, I know that I'm doing a shamanic circle with a student of a famous Cuban shaman that I adore. And so I'm going to get to meet one of his students.
Yes.
Things that I have coming up. I'm the local brujo here where I live, right? Todo el mundo me conoce por el brujo, right? So yeah, I post videos on my YouTube once a month or twice a month. Things that are upcoming. I'm going to be going to Minneapolis. I was asked to be one of the head speakers. I don't know what I'm going to speak about, because Minneapolis is not too many Hispanics. I'm still thinking about that. Things that are coming up. I've been working on a second book for so long, because my first book, I've grown and developed from my first book, and I'm not the same person that I was when I wrote that first book. You know, in that time, I was still in the influence of different things. And so now I want this second book to see how much I've evolved and grown. And so that's a process. And say it.
We'll be sure to put all those things in the description, because all the people that are going to see this and become interested or want to further their knowledge of the things you become a guru on, we definitely want to make sure we facilitate that connection, brother. And once again, from the corazón, man, thank you so much for the time, and really appreciate it.
Muchas gracias, papá. Muchas gracias.
Bendiciones.
Before we get out of here,
Phil,
we got some shout outs.
Oh man, the elevator music.
Yes. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a great episode.
Fabulous.
All right, so let's give some shout outs to the VIPs here.
Oh, VIP.
First one, their username is just woo.
Like Ric Flair?
Like Ric Flair. It's just woo. All right, next one is George Maxwell.
George, thank you.
All right, this person has been here for 4 months, so we got to show them love. This is 𝗿𝗏𝗶𝗏𝗏. Next one, this person has been here for 5 months. This is Ashana Bush.
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Aisha.
And we got another one with Raquel Rivers, also 5 months.
Oh, absolutely, my goddaughter, yeah.
All right, let's head over to the super fans. We got Brendan Johnson.
Thanks, Brendan.
Frankie Salty.
Shout out, Frank.
Eileen Sophia.
Eileen, thank you.
Yep.
Guys, until next time, see the light.
You got to give me some more time. I got to hit the button.
Oh.
See you guys.